Welcome back to Teenage Nightmares, the place that drags you deeper into the world of the unknown. In tonight's chilling episode, we hear from Mark as he recounts a horrifying experience after moving to a new town for work. So sit back, get cozy, and enjoy another Teenage Nightmares original, The Mystery at Mile 6. Hello, my name is Mark, and my story takes place in the spring of 1998. At the time, I was still living with my parents in a small town called Coupeville, Washington. After spending 4 years in California for college, moving back felt like a step in the wrong direction, especially since there were no local jobs that matched my degree in journalism. So I found myself stuck, working at a children's pizza and arcade joint for 3 years straight. Honestly, I probably would have stayed there another 3 if it hadn't been for my old friend Steve. He was in town visiting his parents, and we decided to catch up. That's when he told me he was now running a successful tech company in New York. I half-jokingly said, "Man, I wish I could put my degree to use too." He paused, looked at me, and said, "Journalism, right?" I chuckled and nodded. That's when his eyes lit up. He told me his brother was running a small publishing company out in Maine, and there was an opening. I said yes before he could even finish his sentence. He laughed and told me to slow down, explaining that it was very entry-level and didn't pay all that well. But when I told him I was making $3.75 an hour, he just grinned and said, "Then you'll be fine. This job pays $10 an hour." In the 90s? I couldn't believe it. I was thrilled. The only issue, the job was over 3,000 miles away. I hated the thought of leaving my parents behind. They were getting older, and as an only child, I was all they had. But when I told them about the offer, they just smiled and said, "Don't be foolish. Go do what you worked so hard for." So the next morning, I booked a one-way flight to Maine. When my flight landed, a man named Carlos picked me up from the airport. He worked for the newspaper company and was assigned to get me settled in. On the drive, I asked about the job, since I still hadn't gotten a clear description of what I'd actually be doing. I figured maybe I'd be covering local sports or reporting on small-town crimes. Carlos just chuckled and said, "You'll be going door to door, signing people up for newspaper subscriptions." I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. It wasn't exactly the journalism career I had imagined. But at the same time, I saw it as a foot in the door, an opportunity to prove myself. So I didn't dwell on it. The pay was decent, especially compared to what I was making before. Anything was better than wearing that stupid bear suit and singing stupid songs to those rough little kids all day. And Steve had already found me a cheap little cottage his friend was renting out on the edge of town, which made me feel like things might work out. Carlos drove us straight to the office. He mentioned they had a company car ready for me, since I'd be traveling to different neighborhoods daily. When I got to the office, Terry, Steve's brother, was there to greet me. He handed me a folder stuffed with subscription forms, and then tossed me the keys to a slightly rusted 1984 Volvo. Not exactly the most glamorous set of wheels, but I'd never had my own car before, so to me, it was perfect. I was excited to hop into that rust bucket and hit the road. The first day of routes actually went pretty well. A few people signed up, and I met some interesting characters. But there was one area that gave me the creeps. A small, lonely house sitting at the mile 6 marker. Something about it felt off. It was the middle of the day, sun shining bright, and yet I felt deeply uneasy. The feeling was so strong that I completely bypassed the house. I didn't even knock. I just kept driving and went straight back to the office. Terry looked over my sign-up sheets, thanked me for the day, and sent me off. Not to home exactly. I still hadn't moved in yet. I had to meet up with Alex, the guy renting out the cottage to me. I drove over to the address Steve had given me, and everything went smoothly. I handed Alex the money, and he gave me the keys. A few weeks passed, and I started feeling bored. Worse than that, I felt lonely. I didn't really have any friends out here, apart from a few coworkers I barely knew. My routine became dull fast. Just work, eat, and sleep. No hobbies. No social life. One evening, desperate for something to break the monotony, I decided to go for a drive, just to explore. About 30 minutes out, I stumbled across an old roadside diner and decided to check it out. When I walked in, the place was practically empty, except for a girl my age working as a hostess. She walked over, smiled, and sat me down. When she asked what I wanted, I told her to surprise me with her favorite. She laughed and said, "It's all terrible diner food, so don't blame me." That broke the ice. Before I knew it, we were talking for hours. Sure, I was the only customer there, but the connection felt real. For the first time since moving, I didn't feel so alone. Eventually, I glanced at my watch. It was already 10:30. I apologized and told her I had work early the next morning. But before I left, I asked her out. She said yes. I paid the bill, scribbled down my number, and left the diner feeling amazing. That is, until I noticed my car was nearly out of gas. And just my luck, the nearest gas station was back in the direction of the one place I didn't want to drive near. Mile 6. But I didn't have a choice. I made the quiet drive to the lonely gas station. The place was dead, just me and a single employee behind the counter. I paid for my fuel, stepped back out into the cool night air, and started pumping gas. As I waited, I found myself staring out into the dark stretch beyond the road. That's when I saw him. A tall, shadowy figure stood motionless in the distance, just far enough that I couldn't make out the details, but close enough to feel his presence. He wore what looked like a wide-brimmed black straw hat, tilted low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes or any of his features really, but I didn't need to. Something about him felt wrong, wicked. Then he moved. Slowly, unnaturally, and with each step, I heard the faint but distinct sound of bones cracking and popping. That was enough for me. I yanked the nozzle from my car, slammed the cap shut, and got out of there without looking back. I wasn't about to wait around to see if he got closer. I drove straight home, heart pounding, and rushed into my tiny cottage. The feeling that figure gave me clung to my skin like cold sweat. It took hours before the dread finally started to fade. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Eventually, I climbed into bed, hoping sleep would put some distance between me and that terrifying moment. Just as I was about to doze off, the phone rang. Startled, I stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and picked it up. "Hello," I muttered groggily. No response, just breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. It went on for about 15 seconds. Long enough to spike my adrenaline all over again. I slammed the phone down and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. I told myself it was probably just a prank, some weirdo who dialed a random number. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It took me forever to fall asleep again. The next morning at work, I wrestled with the idea of telling someone, maybe Carlos or even Terry, but decided against it. What would I even say? I didn't want to be the new guy who already sounded paranoid. So, I kept it to myself. But I did think about Shelly, the girl from the diner. She seemed grounded, down to earth. I figured maybe I'd swing by and tell her about what happened. Who knows, maybe she'd believe me. Or maybe she knew something about that strange area. Either way, I needed to talk to someone. Later that evening, I drove back to the diner, hoping to see Shelly again. But when I got there, my heart sank. The place was abandoned. Not recently, decades abandoned. The windows were shattered, the wood siding rotted and peeling. The sign above the entrance hung by a single rusted chain, swaying in the breeze. I stepped out of the car and stared, completely stunned. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? Confused and uneasy, I got back in the car and drove home. I sat alone in that quiet cottage, going over everything in my head, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard a knock at the door. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 11. No one should be visiting me at that hour. Slowly, I walked to the door and peeked through the peephole, and my heart dropped. It was the same figure I saw at the gas station, standing still, staring at the door, silent at first. Then I heard it. "Let me in." He said it again, and again, over and over, in a low, broken voice that scratched against my ears like sandpaper. I backed away, begging him to leave me alone. But he wouldn't stop. The knocking went on for hours. And then, just as the sun began to rise, he vanished. That was years ago. I still don't know who or what he is. But he never stopped coming. He still visits me almost every night. Always knocking, always whispering. I don't know if I'll ever get answers. But I know what I saw, and I know he's still out there, waiting for the day I open the door. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for viewing a Teenage Nightmares original.